Refined question list for pedagogical bridging. Structural bridging questions. On animals as a bridge between theory and observation. This is the most practically powerful part of OPS for teaching. The animal layer lets you see how a person's functions actually move through their stack. It's not abstract. For someone with Jungian training trying to understand animals, how would you explain what animals reveal that Jung's description of the psyche doesn't? Give a concrete behavioral example where identifying the animal makes sense of something Jung's framework leaves ambiguous. On animals as a bridge between theory and observation. The animal layer lets you see how a person's functions actually move through their stack. Indeed. That's the main claim to fame. The second most important theoretical attribution or theoretical instantiation that in terms of intellectual property that objective personality brought forth was the animal functions as a higher order combinatoric, thus fixing the Grant function stack in place and offering animal functions as a higher order combinatoric, linking them to each other in relation to their sexual modalities of the functions. And animal functions, the animal layer lets you see how a person's functions actually moves through their stack. Indeed, it's not abstract. For someone with Jungian training trying to understand animals, how would you explain what animals reveal that Jung's description of the psyche doesn't? It offers us a way to understand adaptation and compensation in a different way. It offers us a way to understand superior and inferior functions in another way. Why is this function different from this function? Why is this type different from that type? In using our example, we bring up the example of MFFESI, blast, play, sleep, consume. MFFESI, blast, play, sleep, consume. And that's supposed to mean something in terms of formal notation. It's supposed to mean the functions that they use and the animal functions that they have. It's supposed to mean feminine FE, masculine SI, feminine NE, masculine TI. It's supposed to mean FMSF blast, FFNF play, MMST sleep, and FMNT consume. It's supposed to correlate with the functions that are here. I think I lost the thread. It's supposed to correlate with the functions being used and the function in and of itself. So what that means is that with animal functions, it acts as a higher order combinatoric, right? So say we just had the 16 psychological types. Say we just had the 8 psychological functions and the 16 psychological types, and we just had animal functions as a higher order combinatoric, linking functions together. That's all it is. It's linking functions together with a specific directionality in terms of the animal activation. And I do it in terms of common notation. I go from most differentiated to least differentiated in terms of a directionality. So that would give us an anchored Grant function stack. For the type that I mentioned, that means feminine FE would be the most differentiated. The second most differentiated would be masculine SI. The third most differentiated would be feminine NE, and the least differentiated would be masculine TI. But for the animal function stack, we have blast, play, sleep, consume. So what does that mean? That means we're going 1 to 2. D, E, F, M, S, F, blast. I know that's a lot to take in right now, but let me say it one more time. DE is the directionality. 1 to 2 is the ordonnance. FM is the modality of the animal function, and SF is the temperament. Blast is the animal function, and you have DE 1 to 2, FM, SF blast. And that gives you your first order animal function. Or no, not first order, but just your animal function. Your fully kitted out animal function in terms of common notation. So for someone with Jungian training trying to understand animals, we would start with an understanding of what the higher order combinatoric represents. And it simply represents animal functions connecting functions together. Ordonnance connects them, is the numbering schema from 1 to 4. 1 to 4 is the ordonnance. That's keeping the grant function stack static, what I call ordonnance. 1, 2, 3, 4. Feminine FE is 1, masculine SI is 2, feminine NE is 3, masculine TI is 4, and we're connecting them. If this was just orthodox Jungian types, and we were saying, okay, but the intellectual property of an animal function has been instantiated, so how do we talk about the difference between blast, play, sleep, consume, and play, blast, sleep, consume? And how do we know which different permutations work and which ones don't? Those are valid questions. But it would just be SF, NF, ST, NT for blast, play, sleep, consume. Why? Because it's FESI, which equals SF blast, FESI, SF blast, FENE, NF play, SITI, ST sleep, and NETI, NT consume. That would be where you left things off. If there was no modalities, it would just be SF blast, NF play, ST sleep, and NT consume in that order. But with modalities now, you're introduced to the modalities of the functions themselves, which is different from formal notation. Formal notation just tells you how to construct the grant function stack based on the sensory being the first character and the extroverted decider, the extroverted judgment, the extroverted rational function as the second character. Is that masculine or is it feminine? Is that masculine or is it feminine? And writing that out in order to determine which functions are which. How would I explain what animals reveal that Jung's description of the psyche doesn't? Is that it offers a flavor of the animal function. The animal function offers a higher order combinatoric. It's keeping the functions of the psyche the same. It's saying all of these people have the exact same psychological functions. And moreover, all of these people have the exact same psychological functions, and they're differentiated in the exact same ordonnance. We can't say they're exactly the same differentiated because sometimes there's a tilt, but in terms of most differentiated to least differentiated, okay, so what do I mean by that? because we're going blast, play, sleep, consume versus blast, sleep, consume, play versus play, blast, sleep, consume versus play, consume, sleep, blast, those might activate different weights in terms of psychological functions that are activated, meaning 3 might be a little bit more differentiated than 2 versus 1 might be a little bit more differentiated than 3 might be a little bit more differentiated than 2. 4 might be a little more differentiated than 3, something like that, where it's like it's being double activated on those lower functions. That's where you get to see this compare and contrast metric, where you're able to dive into, okay, well, these, based on theory, all of these people had the same functions. And not just that, because a lot of people have the same functions in terms of temperaments and what is it called? The quadras, in terms of the quadras. A lot of people have the same functions in terms of the quadras. But these people have the same function stack. That's what we can say. We can say these people have the same function stack. And even still, there's differences. Feminine Fe, masculine Si, feminine Ne, masculine Ti. What are these differences? The differences are espoused as a higher order combinatoric, linking these functions in terms of their activations. The animal function activations. We're saying some are going 1 to 2. That's your core MBTI framework. Adaptation, compensation. Adaptation, compensation. What is a function being differentiated as, and what is it being compensated for? Adaptation, compensation. Adaptation, compensation. From the moment the first function is differentiated, the fourth function automatically becomes differentiated, because there's an inverse adaptation, compensation relationship where one has to compensate for the other. Does that make sense? So in terms of adaptation and compensation, that means when that second function is differentiated in terms of adaptation and compensation, that immediately locks in the third function. Immediately. So you already have a full grant function stack as soon as the second function is differentiated. Why? Because the first differentiates the fourth automatically, simultaneously. Because as one becomes differentiated, the other becomes undifferentiated. So all of those other undifferentiated functions get lopped out, and then you're forced to compensate with the inverse, which we have the math of now, which is what underwrites the grant function stack. So in this context, we're saying, okay, we have an animal function stack. It's acting as a higher order combinatoric, and we're going from 1 to 2. That's the classic origin Tertullian classic functions, classic MBTI people. But then objective personality comes in and they say, hey, I think there are jumpers. What are jumpers? Jumper is 1 to 3 instead of 1 to 2 as the first function. Jumpers, jumping over that second function. Because as soon as that second function gets differentiated, the third function gets differentiated. So when we're talking about higher order combinatorics, we're talking about quick flashes of light, quick flashes of consciousness, quick flashes of orientation, adaptation, compensation, adaptation, compensation, adaptation, compensation, adaptation, jump, compensation. And finding a preference in that jump in terms of hypostatizing psychological functions, not necessarily going as far as to reify them yet, but saying we're willing to hypostatize them as elements of our psyche, which we're giving a linguistic attribution to in terms of the phenomenology that they espouse, based on the technique downstream of the objective personality system. Give a concrete behavioral example where identifying the animal makes sense of something Jung's framework leaves ambiguous. after the first intellectual property advent of the objective personality system, if we just had the one objective personality system intellectual property achievement, it would be the Splitter's conceptualization of the 16 psychological functions. The 8 split into 16 masculine and feminine modalities. That would be the single most, achievable. Oh wow, they did it. Thank you for the intellectual property. We now have 64 grant function stacks. Thank you. This takes that and it says no. They can have the same grant function stack, but that's a different type. That's a different type. That's not a bundle of functions anymore. That's a psychological type. They're saying we can differentiate a psychological type based on this notation because we're adding a higher order combinatoric to the system. So now instead of just saying feminine FE, masculine SI, feminine NE, masculine TI, we're saying no, that's blast, play, sleep, consume, and that's different from blast, sleep, play, consume. That's blast, play, consume, sleep, and that's different from blast, play, sleep, consume. One is an energy dom, the first one, blast, play, sleep, consume, and one is an info dom, blast, play, consume, sleep. And that's a coin checkoff in terms of the first 3 functions being energy animals versus info animals. And I'm sure we'll get into that at a later date. But I wanted to wrap this up to give you a characterization and a contextualization of how I think about animal functions as a bridge between theory and observation. On animals as a bridge between theory and observation. This is the most practically powerful part of OPS for teaching. The animal layer lets you see how a person's functions actually move through their stack. It's not abstract. For someone with Jungian training to understand animals, how would you explain what animals reveal that Jung's description of the psyche doesn't? Give a concrete behavioral example where identifying the animal makes sense of something Jung's framework leaves ambiguous.